All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Ryan Sanders. I'm the Director of Product and Customer Marketing at Keyfactor. And today we are here to talk about the dark side of digital trust. So in case you haven't got it from the title, yes, I am a big Star Wars geek. So this isn't just any old webinar. That's right. Today we are going to be talking about a dark side of digital trust and embarking on a Star Wars themed journey to explore kind of the important role that digital trust plays in today's IT landscape, and more importantly, the risks that lurk in the shadows. So here's a look at what we're going to go through before we embark on this journey together. First off, we're going to start with digital trust. Just what is it? Why does it matter? Then we're going to talk about the dark side of digital trust, because just like the Force, digital trust can be used for good, but it can also be wielded for the dark side, aka bad actors, and they can use it to do harm on your business. So we'll look at the top 6 risks, from expired certificates to code signing attacks, and we'll just break down the impact of these risks with some real world examples as well. And then lastly, we're going to wrap up with a quick look at this concept of crypto agility, which you may have heard before, but it's not just about the transition to post-quantum cryptography. It's more about the resilience and the security of your organization's IT infrastructure moving forward. So we'll talk a bit about that. But before I get into it, though, just a few quick reminders. It wouldn't be an adventure without some preparations, right? So first off, ask questions. We'll try to save those for the end. We'll have some time a little bit. But even if we don't get to it, I will seek the counsel of our PKI Jedis at Keyfactor and make sure that you get the responses that you're looking for. Next up, be sure to check out the resources or the attachments tab at the end. We've got some great content in there, including an ebook that dives deeper into the subject matter that we're covering today, and also provides some prescriptive guidance on how you can kind of solve some of these challenges that we'll cover. And then lastly, get in touch with us. There's a link there as well if you'd like to request a demo, or if you just like to seek the counsel of one of our PKI Jedis yourself, aka our solution engineers. So make sure to check those out at the end of the webinar, and again, ask questions all the way through. Oh, and one last disclaimer before we get into it. As I said, we'll be dropping some serious Star Wars movie references throughout the webinar. So if for whatever reason George Lucas or anyone from Disney is on here from the creative team, please don't send your stormtroopers. We're just trying to have a little fun. But even if you're not a big Star Wars fan, don't worry. You'll still be able to follow along, and there's lots of good stuff in here for you too. All right, so let's set the stage for where we're about to go. So for those of you who've been in cybersecurity for a while, you know the story all too well. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, we lived in the age of the network. So if you were within the perimeter or subnets, those were considered high trust. You'd be authenticated. But if you're coming from the public internet, those IPs were untrusted, and firewall filters and controls would prevent, or at least make it really hard for outsiders to get in. But we know this isn't the reality anymore. Now everything is connected all the time. We live in this age of what we call always on. Connectivity is really the lifeblood of business now. Everything operates within this connected ecosystem. So using IP as the unit of control just doesn't make sense anymore. And also, it's not just people and devices that we're worried about, right? It's virtual and cloud workloads, it's software and applications, it's code that you're developing or consuming, and the connected things that reach out to the very edges. I'm actually here at Gartner Identity and Access Management Summit today, and one of the biggest topics, the top trend that they called out here, was machine identities, specifically workload identities. So this is a key piece of cybersecurity moving forward. And of course, that's where identity comes into the picture, right? Every secure connection requires an identity to authenticate and verify both entities on both ends, whether it's a human, a device, a workload, or anything in between. Both sides need to have an identity to be trusted. And just as important, secure communications between those. So using encryption to protect the data that's shared between those entities is very important as well. And then, of course, lastly, the final principle is integrity. Every secure connection needs integrity to ensure that data or code isn't altered or tampered in any way. And that really brings us to this 3-letter word that we're very familiar with at Keyfactor, which is PKI. Public key infrastructure is absolutely essential to enable these core principles that I just mentioned and to securely connect virtually everything across your business. So it's not just a piece of software, it's the foundation of digital trust and it's critical infrastructure behind all of these operations. And if we look at it, the number of applications and use cases that your PKI is supporting continues to grow exponentially. I mean, we of course talk to organizations about standard use cases like user and device authentication, but we're increasingly seeing PKI being used, for example, in DevOps environments. There's a new standard for workload identity called SPIFFE. We're seeing more and more usage of that for authentication in microservices environments. We're also seeing more signing of containers, ensuring that container images have integrity and that they're trusted as well. And then even reaching out to those IoT devices. Many organizations out there are also manufacturing products, whether it's appliances or connected IoT devices, smart devices, and building security into those. Digital certificates and PKI are one of the most effective ways to do that. So suffice it to say that PKI is growing exponentially, and it's become, again, critically important to how your business operates. But what happens when these systems of trust that we rely on are either undermined, compromised, or even weaponized, whether by bad actors or just unintentionally by mistake? As the old saying goes, trust takes years to build and only seconds to break. And just as Emperor Palpatine here, if you're familiar with this guy, he manipulated power and trust in an attempt to conquer the galaxy. And there will always be those who seek to do the same in the real world with digital trust, manipulating that to get their own way, to get access to your systems, to compromise data, etc. So it's important that we understand the dark side as well, and the consequences there. So we're going to dive into what happens when digital trust is broken. We're going to look at some real world examples that have occurred in the last few months, as well as the last few years, and examine their impact on organizations. So with that, let's get into number one, certificates strike back. So if you've worked with PKI and certificates, you likely know the pain and the frustration of when one expires unexpectedly. Of course, we know that certificates enable secure communications, but when they expire, just like our passwords do, or at least should, whatever server or application that certificate is installed on is no longer trusted, and it effectively gets locked out. And that's what leads to those outages, unless that certificate is renewed and replaced before it expires. So the data there that you see on the top right is actually from a survey that we did earlier this year with Vance and Bourne. It was of, I believe, around 1,000 to 1,500 IT and security professionals. And we asked them, how long does the average outage take from initial detection all the way through to full recovery? The average time was 318 minutes. Also, we asked how many of these do you experience each year, at least notable outages, ones that are significant enough to kind of reach beyond one person. And they said these happen roughly 3 times a year. And that really shouldn't come as a shock to anyone because a certificate isn't really going to be the first place you look, right? 318 minutes is a long time, but if a system goes down, the immediate thought in someone's mind is not, this must be a certificate. They're going to go down 1,000 different rabbit holes potentially before they realize that it is an expired cert. In some cases, it's more obvious. For instance, if it's your website, you'll get that 404 error. But in some cases, it's not going to be so straightforward. So actually finding that certificate, identifying where it lives, because if it's a wildcard cert, for example, it can live in hundreds of different places. And then also figuring out what is the process to renew and reissue that cert, who owned it in the first place, and then how do you actually provision it out to those different services and also restart those services. There's a lot that's involved in that process. And of course, that leads to the amount of time that it takes to recover fully from these incidents. And we've seen several cases of this year already. So these are just a few of them from 2024. And from major banking institutions to even the largest tech companies, we've seen very disruptive, very public outages caused by expired certificates. And what's particularly painful about at least a couple of these is that it wasn't just the end entity certificate that was installed on a single device that expired. In some cases, it was actually the root certificate that expired without being replaced. And that's a much bigger issue to recover from and a much bigger thing that you need to plan well in advance for to avoid that type of scenario. So these are very disruptive. We looked at the amount of time as well. The first outage, it happened to a major UK banking institution. You could Google these, but I prefer not to put the company names there. But that was a 39-minute outage to a major payment settlement system, something that was used globally and settled, I think it was 6 trillion settlements in the month of August alone. So minutes of downtime count there, of course. Every minute counts. We also saw a second outage happen in that same case that was 90 minutes long, same banking institution there later in the year. And then when it came to these tech companies as well, we saw an ITSM platform, we saw a major travel website, several instances. And it's not to call out these companies, we see these happen all the time. It's just to call out an industry-wide problem that these certificates are often unknown and untracked in organizations, and that's really what's leading to these problems. And while it might be that cyber attacks get all the attention and grab the headlines, you're far more likely to experience disruption from other issues like certificate renewals or missed renewals that have nothing to do with malicious actors. So CrowdStrike was a great example of that. While it caused widespread disruption, the issue earlier this year, it had nothing to do with a cyber attack. It wasn't caused by a certificate either, but it does stress the importance of not just cyber security, but cyber resilience. And the enemy of resilience is disruption, like disruption caused by certificates. What's more, though, and you may be aware of this if you're joining today, is that the lifespan of certificates is only getting shorter. So there were proposals by both Google and Apple to reduce the lifespan of publicly trusted certificates down to either 90 or even 45 days over the next few years. So as the volume of certs increases and the lifespan decreases, of course, that's putting a lot of pressure on the teams that are responsible for, on the one hand, tracking these certificates, and on the other hand, the application owners who actually have to go through the process of installing these certificates and renewing them as well. So there's two parties involved here. And it's affecting both of them. And Acme, as great as it is, isn't going to do the job for every use case. So it's becoming increasingly challenging, which, by the way, I found pretty interesting that on Apple's proposal here, I took a screenshot. You can actually see there are a number of dislikes and thumbs down. You can bet that those are all people who are probably familiar with the pain of chasing down application owners to renew their certs and aren't happy to hear about this news. But all of that to say that this is the direction we're moving in. So things are likely to get worse if organizations aren't kind of upping their game when it comes to certificate lifecycle management, moving away from manual methods and spreadsheets and tracking in databases to something more automated. All right, next up is the rogue ones. So these are your rogue users and teams that go off on their own, and like water, they're going to find that path of least resistance, right? The easiest way to grab a cert and install it wherever they need to. And the main culprits here are often self-signed certificates in production environments. We also see just careless use of wildcard certificates because, of course, if one cert expires, it affects all of the certs where that's located when it comes to wildcard. And again, if the private key of that wildcard cert is compromised in any way, it then compromises all of the endpoints using that wildcard cert as well. So there's a lot of risk we often see there. It's an easy button, but it's not the safest button to press. And then we also see teams using issuance capabilities that are built into the tools that they already use. And that's not really a problem, except for the fact that oftentimes that's happening outside the purview of the security or infrastructure identity team, the people who own PKI and the management of identities, and often not compliant with the policy of the business. But the root of these problems is often actually the enterprise PKI that's deployed in the organization by the IT or security team, because it's either inaccessible to those other teams, it's slow, it's manual, or it just doesn't fit their use case that they're trying to address. So maybe it can't integrate with their platform. Maybe there's no API that they can use, or maybe it's just not able to deploy quickly enough or where they need it, for instance, in the cloud. And that's what leads, of course, to these teams going off and doing their own things. So we see maybe infrastructure or cloud or networking teams going off and using possibly cloud native solutions, AWS, Azure, GCP. Again, there's no issue with using these except for the fact, again, that they're often used outside of corporate policy. Also, we see DevOps teams and engineering teams. They use maybe wildcard certs, self-signed certificates in a lot of cases, and they also need to sign code. And the issues around that we'll talk about in a sec, but there's a lot of challenges around knowing who has access to code signing certificates. And then lastly, I mentioned a bit earlier, but the product security team, what are they doing? Oftentimes they're responsible for building security into their products, but they don't have the expertise in PKI and cryptography to actually do that properly. So we see instances where keys are maybe embedded in repositories or in firmware. We even saw that in one case, I believe, with one of the network router manufacturers back in 2016. So all of this to say, again, that there's a lot of rogue activity that can happen that leads back to those outages we talked about earlier, but also to some potential security issues. All right, next up is the bad batch. So just like enterprise teams need to set rules around their PKI and kind of govern and enforce those rules continuously, publicly trusted CAs or certificate authorities have to abide by the rules of the CAB or the CAB forum, the Certificate Authority and Browser Forum. And they are held to a very high standard. Even the slightest mistake can lead to a mass revocation of certificates. So on the left, I actually dropped a screenshot. You may not be able to read all of that, but it's just to show that these are some of the reasons that SCA may misissue certificates, and those need to be revoked. So we saw actually a few cases where that happened this year. Number one is we saw with Entrust, they had misissued, I think that was 24,000 EV certificates. And then they were later notified based on their response to that by Google that they would be distrusted by the Chrome browser, which was then followed by the other browsers in a very short time frame. And then we also saw very soon after, DigiCert had to revoke 84,000 certificates due to a software bug. So all of these things, I want to be clear, are actually a sign that the system is working. They're a sign that we've built this to respond to a mistake or an incident and that we are doing that. However, that doesn't negate the fact that this does still impact the end users, right? The ones who need to replace those certificates in a very short window of time. And of course, every organization who dealt with this knows the pain of that, especially if it's in a 24-hour or a 5-day window. In this case, Google did walk back their timeline a bit, and Entrust did find a solution to reissue those certificates in an alternative way. But it still caused quite a bit of disruption for users of those certificates. Next up is attack of the code. So this one I am particularly passionate about, as I've done a lot of research in this area. And it's honestly, I think, one of the most overlooked areas when it comes to digital certificates. So just for some context here, code signing keys are used to digitally sign code and make sure that you know where it came from, who authored it, and also that it hasn't been tampered with since it was signed. But if an attacker does get their hands on that code signing key, they can do a lot of damage both to your brand and to other organizations. So attack groups and nation states have been using this method actually for quite some time, all the way back to Stuxnet. If you remember when the Iranian centrifuges were slowed down or the speed was altered, there was a code signing certificate actually used on a USB stick that injected that malware. So dates all the way back to Stuxnet, but there have been several cases of that since then. We saw a major incident with Shadowhammer as an example with the ASUS devices. But I've called out a few here. One that I really wanted to zoom in on was Microstar International. So in this case, attackers stole sensitive data, as they always do. They don't necessarily just steal the code signing certs. It's a part of a much bigger breach. And then they asked for ransom, $4 million. When MSI didn't comply with that, they leaked the keys on the dark web. And those keys were used to sign firmware across 57 different products. So it has a significant impact, not just on security, but just on the brand. And it's important to recognize that. And no organization is immune to this. While this is an example with Microstar, there have been, again, several cases where this has happened. Also want to call out on the top right there, same survey data from that. We looked at where these code signing keys are actually stored. So 53% said that code signing keys are stored in workstations, and 52% said that they were still stored on build servers. These are potentially vulnerable areas where they should not be kept. We often see USB sticks or another method of storing code signing keys. The methods to sign are often either very slow and manual, but sometimes a little more secure, or they're not secure, but they're fast. Developers want to move quickly, so they put these keys where they're easily accessible, and that creates a lot of course, risk. So the important thing here, and we'll talk about this in a bit, is understanding where these keys are generated and stored, but also understanding who has access to them and who can leverage them to sign code. All right, number 5 is revenge of the myth. So most of you are probably familiar with SSH keys, but these are credentials that are used to authenticate remote access and management of servers and networking infrastructure and operating systems. The problem is that unlike TLS certificates, SSH keys are generated by individual users. They're not generated from a central source like TLS certs come from a certificate authority, and they also never expire. So what we'll often see is when we talk to clients is these dormant or forgotten keys that are laying vulnerable on servers because someone generated a key maybe to get temporary access to a Linux server, or an employee left the company, but their keys weren't terminated when they left. And just like code signing keys, attackers will actively seek out SSH keys on systems, and they know exactly where to look for them in places like common directories. So for instance, SSH Snake, which actually was widely publicized this year, examines shell history files to find commands related to SSH operations that may have used or referenced SSH private keys. What's interesting about this is that SSH Snake was actually a tool developed by a security engineer for good. He designed it as a tool to automate mapping SSH connections within a network. But then, of course, threat actors came in, they took it, they turned it into a self-modifying worm that searches for SSH credentials on compromised systems. And what makes the situation even worse is that remediating it is really hard because users will often share keys, or these keys will have excessive privileges like root access. And you can't just rotate or delete a key and hope that it's not going to impact anything. These are very fragile assets because we often don't know what they're connected to, who owns it, and what systems is it being used for. So you could end up taking a critical service down or denying a user access by deleting or rotating that key without their knowledge. So there's a lot of kind of political angle here too, of working with other teams and understanding how they're using these keys to map it to the network. But that all of that said, we recommend in the long term moving to SSH certificates, which are a much more secure and governable way of using SSH authentication. All right, last but certainly not least is the quantum menace. And this one is a bit of a misnomer, I think. I just wanted to go for, the Star Wars reference, but quantum computers do present a fantastic opportunity for scientific and economic breakthroughs. That said, their power can eventually be wielded by the dark side, aka nation states or attack groups, to break current encryption standards and steal sensitive data. So experts predict that quantum computers of this scale and capacity, ones that are capable of breaking our current encryption standards, namely RSA, will be available sometime between 2029 and 2035. But the reality is that the threat is already here. Attackers are strategically sourcing encrypted data now to quite literally unlock its value when cracking encryption in the future with a quantum computer that becomes commercially viable for them to use to do just that, to crack encryption. So there's already real world signs that this is happening today. We've seen ransomware attacks where they're not just encrypting the data in place, they are stealing the encrypted data first, then encrypting it again to lock, of course, the organization out from that data. So there's signs that attackers are already starting to use this method, and NIST has certainly stressed the importance of understanding this risk and addressing it, which leads to the final point, which is that the new standards are already here, right? The MLDSA, MLChem, and SLHDSA were already released in August. We've started to see organizations adopt Keyfactor, at least at our solutions. We've adopted those algorithms, so we now support them in our PKI signing and certificate management solutions. And it is on vendors first, right, to ensure that we can adopt those so that you can start leveraging the solutions as well in a quantum safe way. That said, there are things that you can do to start preparing today, like building your inventory, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But NIST also made another major announcement, which was the deprecation of current standards. So, forgot one point. 23%. So we looked at, back to that survey I mentioned earlier, 23% of respondents said that work was in progress to begin planning for post-quantum cryptography. This survey was done, the data was pulled in late 2023, and we published the survey or the report in 2024, earlier this year. So this number has certainly grown, I would say, to probably closer to 30%. But still, many organizations are lagging in this, and there is a very short window for this change moving forward, for this significant change. So if we look at this timeline here, these are a few of the very important milestones that are coming up. So again, I mentioned the NIST release of the algorithms, Gartner and IBM's predictions around when quantum computers will be capable of breaking current standards like RSA 2048-bit keys. But also NIST announced the deprecation of RSA and the other algorithms that you see listed there by 2030, and those algorithms will be disallowed in 2035 for government agencies. Of course, the industry as a whole will adopt these standards inevitably, but that is a very short time frame. Given, for example, if we think back to the move from SHA-1 to SHA-2 and how long that actually took, still we see SHA-1 prevalent in some organizations. This is a change on a much bigger scale, and again, in a shorter window. So preparing for this, organizations should already be taking action on this, not only planning and preparing, but starting to make those initial moves. And I wanted to call out a quote from IBM here. I thought it was a good one, just that 10 to 15 years is really not a long time when you consider that a lot of the critical pieces of this infrastructure have remained unchanged for years. And that's kind of part of the nature of PKI, right? We set the root CA, we set the issuing CAs, and they have a lifespan. And it's for root CAs, it can be quite a long time. It can extend beyond the tenure, in many cases, of the employee that initially set it up. So preparing for this is going to be something unprecedented in the world of PKI and cryptography, something that is maybe not necessarily as familiar with constant change, and is going to be quite disrupted. So this will impact many organizations, and it's important to start having these conversations with your teams. All right, so where do we actually go from here, right? We've traveled through the dark side. We've come out the other end. How do we figure this out? How do we fight back against the dark side? And I have two words, and that is crypto agility. So crypto agility is a concept used by many. Honestly, it's quite a buzzword at this point. But overall, it is the goal of being able to seamlessly swap out or update cryptography without causing significant disruption to the business. It's really the new hope that we have for digital trust as we move into this post-quantum world and as we face increasing threats from the dark side. So I want to talk just a little bit about what are some of those key elements to building a crypto agile strategy for your business. And number one, this is always where we start, is just getting an inventory of your assets, understanding not only how many certificates you have, but where those certificates are being used, the applications that are leveraging them, who owns them, which teams are responsible. That takes time to map that all out. Of course, there are solutions that can help you discover those certificates wherever they live, but ultimately, it's understanding those plus your crypto libraries and plus other areas of cryptography across the business. It's not just certificates. So understanding what you have is really the first step to mapping out your plan for migration in the future. You really can't do that until you know what you have. And then, of course, it's modernizing your systems of trust that we talked about earlier. In this case, I'm talking about public key infrastructure and signing, understanding that your PKI today may not be able to support those algorithms that are coming, or may be lagging at least in its support of those new standards. And keep in mind that this is the first set of standards to be released by NIST. There will be more standards moving forward. We already know that Falcon currently will be, I think it's FNDSA moving forward, has yet to be standardized, and there will be several more. moving forward. So this is not the end. This is a continuous cycle of updating the algorithms that we'll be using in the future. So making sure that your systems are prepared for that kind of agility and that they're being updated regularly with support for those algorithms is really important. But not only that, looking at today and the problems that you're trying to solve, can your PKI, is it agile enough to support your team's needs when it comes to deploying where you need it? Can it deploy as hardware if you're in a manufacturing environment or a highly secure environment? Can it be deployed as a software appliance in your data center? Or can it be deployed in Azure or AWS or GCP in your environments in the cloud? Or is it a SaaS solution that you need because you don't necessarily have the skills or expertise to run that in house? These are all important considerations as you look at modernizing your trust systems. Next up is automating those processes. So, again, we talked about migration to post quantum. Automation is going to be a big piece of that, but it also addresses the challenges that you're already facing today, especially when it comes to those certificate renewals. So, not only automating the renewal process, but also automating the provisioning process. That is often the most painful point, right? A user will renew a cert, they'll grab that cert, and you don't know where it goes from there. We've run across that in many organizations that we talk to, where there's no validation of was that cert actually installed where it needed to be and was it installed correctly? And they don't find out about that till later when there's a system disruption. So making sure there's an automated process for provisioning those certificates, ensuring the proper bindings are in place, and that those trust stores have been updated is critically important as well, and will be even more important as we move into this post-quantum world. Next up is protecting those sensitive keys and certs. So specifically here, we're talking about code signing keys and SSH keys. With code signing keys, ensuring that those are generated and stored in an HSM is the best practice and really the only way that code signing keys should be leveraged. Also, though, beyond that, making sure that only the right people have access to sign with those keys. Implementing policies like when they can sign, what they can sign, with what keys. These are all critically important to ensure that even if somebody were to breach a signing server, they still can't sign code because they don't have the proper permissions to do that. These are both equally important, the secure handling of keys and the secure access to keys. And then with SSH keys, of course, that's oftentimes more of a cleanup, right? Ensuring that you map out the SSH keys in your network, or SSH credentials in general, I should say, because there are SSH passwords and certificates as well, and understanding how those are used and deleting those keys or revoking them where possible, and ensuring that the ones that are in place are properly rotated on a regular basis. And then lastly is just enabling teams to move quickly. This goes back to the rogue users and teams that we talked about earlier. The only reason they're doing that is because the proper way is not the easy way. So there needs to be, of course, a balance there of ensuring that they're adopting the proper policies in place. And things that can help with that, of course, are APIs and integrations with the tools that they're using, automation, but even self-service forms, making sure that they, in some cases, if it's maybe an F5 admin, they can go in there, they can easily request a certificate, and either that can be automatically provisioned to the F5 load balancer, or it can be downloaded by the user and put on that server themselves. But in either case, that process needs to be easy, and you need to work individually with each of these teams to make sure that you have the right process and workflows in place. But together, all of these things equal crypto agility. They enable you to be resilient no matter really what comes your way, including, of course, the transition to post-quantum, but the many things that you already face in your day-to-day jobs. All right, so with that, if you're ready to be a PKI Jedi, I've got a couple of assets for you. So the dark side of digital trust, many of the topics that we covered today are actually covered in much more depth in that ebook. So I highly recommend downloading that from the attachments tab. It's a great resource, not only for you to read more in depth, but also to share with your team and help spread awareness around the real risks of some of the things that we've talked about today. And then secondly is the ebook that you see there on how investing in certificate automation is protecting your business and your bottom line. So this is a great asset to build a business case for how do we actually address these challenges, at least when it comes to managing digital certificates, which is a key piece of it. So The second piece there is available on our website if you want to check that out there. But the Dark Side of Digital Trust resource is available directly from Bright Talk if you want to check that out. Next, before we get into Q&A, just wanted to let everyone know that we've got a big conference coming up here in March, Keyfactor Tech Days. If you were there for our 2023 conference in Barcelona, it was fantastic. It's one of the biggest gatherings of PKI and cryptography experts in the world. And it's a fantastic place to be to not only engage with your peers, but also hear from experts. Companies like AWS and Zoom and ServiceNow are all going to be speaking at Tech Days. So really looking forward to that and hearing their best practices and their insights. So if you want to give that QR code there a quick scan, you can check out the website, check out the sessions that we have available. I think they just went live this week. And the early bird rate actually ends on December 20th. So if you're thinking about it, or if you want to invite some team members, keep that in mind, that December 20th is that deadline for the early bird. Of course, you can still register after that, but want to make sure you can catch that break if you can. All right, so let's open it up for some Q&A. Feel free to drop your questions in the question tab, and I will try to address those. I see a couple here, but we've got, I think, maybe 3.5 minutes left. So I'll try to address those, the ones that we've got. So one is, where does AI fit into this? Great question. I think we've talked, like when we talk about the force, AI is very similar, right? It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. On the good side, vendors like Keyfactor are looking at how to incorporate AI in a meaningful way into our solutions to help users make faster and more informed or intelligent decisions with the data that we have, with the certificates within the platform. But on the flip side, there is also the whole challenge around content authenticity. How do we know that code or content, whether it's video or images, is authentic? And PKI is playing a critical role in that as well, ensuring that we can actually sign these images and videos to ensure that we know where they came from and when they were signed. In fact, one of our customers, TruePick, is leveraging our solutions, EJBCA and Sign Server, to do just that. Really cool solution that they offer if you want to check that out on their website. Another question that we have here is, does Keyfactor support the NIST PQ standards? Yes, I did mention that earlier. We do support MLDSA, MLChem, and SLHDSA. You can check that out in our release notes. We actually just had a release drop last week of our PKI and signing solutions, and we highlighted the support for those algorithms in that release. And then also with Keyfactor Command, we support the generation of post-quantum and hybrid certificates as well, and that'll be coming, I believe, in January, generally available. So looking forward to that. But yes, we do support those standards, and we'll continue to roll out and work with our partners, because that is really the key to this, to preparing for post-quantum, is working with our partners, for example, our HSM vendors, to ensure that we can integrate and leverage HSMs as a part of that process to securely generate post-quantum certificates. So with that, I think that's all the questions that we've got for today. So I will leave you with this. May the force be with you. So thank you, everyone, for joining today. Again, if you want to check out the resource in the attachments tab, it goes a little more in depth. It's a great one to share with your team, highlight some of the risks that we've talked about here, also helps quantify some of those risks. And then if you want to check out that other building the business case asset, that's available on our website on keyfactor.com. If you want to connect with me or one of our PKI experts, feel free to click that link as well, and we'll certainly connect with you afterwards. But thank you again, everyone, for attending, and we will catch you on the next webinar.